Leading Britain's conversation, Cross Question, with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8:03. It's our Cross Question Economy and Business Debate on LBC. Your chance to quiz four politicians about their party's policies on the economy and the world of business. Two subjects which I actually think have been rather ignored in this campaign so far. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can watch us on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, the YouTube channel, Facebook page or Twitter feed. Joining me for the next hour, Nadhim Zahawi, Business Minister, Conservative candidate; Nicola Horlick, British Investment Fund Manager and Liberal Democrat candidate; Jake Pugh is a businessman and Brexit Party MEP; and Sam Tarry is President of the Class think tank, a trade unionist and a Labour Party candidate. So we'll come to your questions in just a moment.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Welcome to you all. Let's crack on with our first caller. Peter is a new caller in Wetherby. Hello, Peter.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, what would you like? Could you all put your
ask
headphones
the
on?
panel why they think anybody ever wants to incur austerity. I mean, politics is about the vote business, and it's obviously a much more popular thing to spend money than not to spend it. So what was the reason? Why did we have austerity? Why did Greece have austerity? Why did Spain, Portugal, all these other countries have austerity? You know, no politician likes to cut spending. So what was the reason? What were they trying to avoid? If they hadn't had austerity, what would have happened?
All right. Nadhim Zahawi.
Hi, Peter. When we came into office, there was a letter left by the outgoing Labour Chief Secretary saying, good luck to you, there's no money left. For every £4 that government was spending, now government has no money of its own, it's yours and my money, taxpayers' money that we administer, that we're the stewards of. For every £4 that we were then spending on all the public services, we would have to borrow £1. Today, for every £23, we borrow £1. So by dealing with that massive, crippling deficit, which was standing at about £156 billion. That's the difference between what money comes in taxes versus what the government was pledged to spend. We've cut that by 4/5 now, which is why we can make the investment. If we get Brexit done...
Oh, well done. 1 minute in.
No, but it's important. If we get Brexit done, you've got 5-year parliament. Governments have 5 years. Imagine a company has 5 years to deliver its strategy. If you spend your first year, as Labour want to, in another 2 referenda, one rigged now, of course, on Europe because they want everyone to vote on this thing and to see if they can overturn the result. Second one to the SNP because they know they can't get a majority, so that they need the SNP. The SNP's prize for that is a second referendum in Scotland. So you're going to spend the first year of your 5-year strategy in a psychodrama, more dither, more delay. Well, what we're saying is, let's get Brexit done.
Let's stick on the question.
Then make the investment, 100 billion in infrastructure.
All right.
34 billion
We'll come on to all of that. But I mean, I'm going to anticipate what Sam is going to say, and I don't want to steal your thunder, Sam. But I mean, he will say it was a political choice. I imagine. He's nodding.
Not at all.
You didn't have to do it so sharply, did you?
Not at all. I've just outlined the challenge. If a government is borrowing £1 in every 4 it's spending, that is unsustainable. There's nothing moral or decent about crashing an economy. Look at what's happened to Venezuela. No Venezuelan should be poor. The country floats on a lake of oil. Every Venezuelan, if the country had been run properly, should be a millionaire. Yet, if you're poor in Venezuela, you die. If you crash an economy, no one gets hurt more than the most vulnerable people.
But do you accept that it could have been done differently, that you got things wrong, that there were some government programmes, I mean, you look at the homeless figures, for example, which have mushroomed over the last 10 years, that people will say, well, that was a political choice, not necessarily always by central government, but partly also by local government too. But that was a choice that was made.
Which is why we put more money into the one. We've introduced a landmark piece of legislation, the Homeless Reduction Act, which requires local authorities to act on anyone who's homeless in their area. We've put £1 billion into it up to 2021.
Fine. But all I'm asking is, do you accept that there were things that could have been done differently?
There is no doubt that, as Boris Johnson is on record as saying that we need now to make the investment because we've dealt responsibly with balancing the books. We can make the investment into our health service, into our schools, into our security. 20,000 more police officers.
Okay.
You know the numbers. 40 more
I
hospitals.
do very well by now. I think we all do. Sam Tarry, back to the caller's question. Did we have to have austerity in the first place? And given that other countries had it, wasn't it unavoidable?
Look, I think we need to scotch this sort of nonsense once and for all. You don't run a country's economy like you run your bank account. And let's be very, very clear about this. The reason the country was in debt is because of the US subprime mortgage collapse and the collapse of the economy, the economic crash that happened in 2008. In fact, if the government had actually invested over the last 10 years, we'd actually been in a much better position, in my view, in terms of the amount of job creation, about the amount of wealth. Instead, what we've actually seen, in my view, is not just the last 10 years, but longer than that, an ideology that says the only way to run our economy is in the interests of the people at the very, very top. And we're in a situation now when the top 5% the top 5% own 45% of this country's wealth. You know, the Conservative minister talks about homelessness on the streets. You walk out the front of this studio here, there are people dossing down all across London. You know, austerity is a political choice because it was about reducing the role of the state. And Labour are pretty clear. We need to have a state because the state is what protects us. It's what provides the welfare and
because
dignity.
Because all we've heard in this election campaign so far from Labour is all the money that they want to spend or borrow, raise taxes from. And a lot of people think, well, how would they have done differently in 2010? Would they have done that then? Because I can't really see Gordon Brown going down that line in 2010.
I think if we'd had an investment-led economy, I mean, look, at the moment we've got manufacturers, we've lost nearly 800,000 manufacturing jobs over the last 10 years. We've got huge manufacturers, British marques like Land Rover, leaving the country because of the decisions the Tory government have taken.
How are Land Rover leaving the country? They've announced millions of pounds of investment in this country.
They're going to be building in Slovakia rather than in this country.
That's nothing to do with government policy, though. That was a decision made for other reasons.
I think that there could have been a lot more done to ensure that those jobs were kept in this country. Look, one of the things Labour is saying, if we want to have decent, well-paid jobs that have good pensions, we have to invest into the economy. We're now at the bottom, or heading towards the bottom, of the G7 index in terms of investment-led programmes by governments. It can't just be led to the private sector to invest into our economy. And remember, we're not just talking about infrastructure investment, not just talking about new railways and new hospitals and new schools. We're talking about investment into people. Because I think one of the things I find most frustrating as a trade unionist is we're asked to work the longest hours in this country, yet we have the lowest productivity levels of any country in the G7. That can't be right. If we're investing into people, as well as our built environment and our infrastructure, that will be the surefire way to get this economy back on track.
Nicola Horlick, you've been a keen observer and participant in the world of business for a long time. The Liberal Democrats were in government during the coalition. Presumably you therefore supported their support for austerity.
Well, going back to the question, which is why were all these countries having this period of austerity? One thing that people have to understand is that when you issue government debt, somebody has to buy it. And the people who buy it are other governments and pension funds around the world and unit trusts or mutual funds in the US. And in order for them to want to buy that debt when you issue it, they have to have confidence in that economy. And if it looks like an economy that's running out of control with very high spending, then they're going to demand much higher interest rates. So when we had the financial crisis, the reason why Spain and Italy and Greece and us and US and everywhere had to rein things back was because we had to persuade international investors to buy our bonds. So it's not as easy as it sounds. And so, in order to maintain the confidence in markets and make sure that we could pay for our public services, which always requires some borrowing, there had to be a period of austerity. Now, in terms of whether mistakes were made, I think probably there were some mistakes made. I think it was probably a bit too harsh. We could have invested in some smaller infrastructure projects, and I was very keen on that idea at the time. It takes a long time to plan a huge project like HS2, but it doesn't take long to plan a new school or a new walk-in centre for the NHS or whatever. So I think that was a mistake. We could have ploughed a bit more money in. and still maintained the confidence of the markets. But at the end of the day, Nadhim is right. You have to maintain confidence in your economy in order to finance things. And there, unfortunately, did have to be a period of austerity.
Could I point out, though, that your answer is markedly different from that of your leader, who has apologised for her part in supporting the coalition government's austerity policies? You're nodding at me there. I'm just wondering how you can hold your views, she can hold hers, and you're in the same party.
Well, I just said there were mistakes made, and we could have had some infrastructure spending, which would have then allowed the construction sector to do better, and then you would have had a cascade down because the workers in the sector would be paid more, and then they could spend that money, and then other people would benefit. So I think it was a little bit too tight, the grip on it. But purely, I wasn't a politician then, looking at it purely as an investor and somebody who has to analyse global markets. I'm afraid to say there had to be a period of austerity.
Just a reminder, the number 0345 6060 973. We're just going to take calls on the economy and business. If you can sort of wangle another subject in and try and relate it to business, be my guest. But this is the economy and business debate. What would you say? Was it a mistake for austerity, Jake, Pugh, for the Brexit Party?
Let's address the question directly. So it was the contraction of the economy was driven by the financial crisis, but the fear was that there would be a hit to the real economy. So back in 2008, 2009, 2010, the fear was the parallel was the 1930s. So that was the level of concern globally that was a path we might follow. So there were two parts to the response. One was around cutting government spending, really just to contract that part of the economy, but also to save money, implication for ratings and governments raising money. But the other part, remember, to that was the aggressive cutting of rates, which we still have. So rates are still very low in the UK, 0.75 basis point, 0.75%, and even lower, of course, in the Eurozone, which we'll probably talk about. So it's important to understand those two parts to it. But the fear we need to remind ourselves, which is why the response was so draconian, was the reference point was the 1930s.
And what if there was a Brexit Party government now? What is it? Would you think the time is now to loosen the purse strings a bit?
Yeah, I think what we really want to talk about is the positive story about Brexit. You said that this is one of the very few shows on business and the economy because it's been around the topics that it's been, get it done, and the NHS and nothing else, as opposed to really the positives that come out, the opportunities that come out of Brexit. So I think it's a combination of things. We need to clearly some infrastructure investment. There's opportunities to cut tax. We've talked about cutting corporation tax, but also cut taxes, the cost of living for the poorest in society. We've talked about cutting zero rating VAT on domestic fuel. The benefit of leaving the single market customs union, the sooner we do that, which we obviously can't do in transition, we can then reduce tariffs. So 20% of our food comes from outside the European Union. So I think it's a combination of reducing the cost of living, certain investments, traditional infrastructure investments, but also investing in skills, because the productivity gap is a key part of the problem.
Tarry, just respond to what Nicola said about interest rates there, because as I understand it, Labour wants to finance a lot of its spending plans through the issuing of government bonds. But if the money markets don't have confidence in a Labour government, then the interest rates will rise and the cost to the taxpayer of borrowing will exponentially rise. Do you accept that logic?
I actually think that there's a great hunger within the business community for the scale of investment our country needs at the moment. I think that it's not going to be the public sector that's building railways, it's not going to be the public sector that's building schools. If we're putting the scale of investment in place that we've planned, people in the private sector can do very, very well out of this. I think this is the reality. I remember talking to people at the CBI who basically said the same thing. If we scale up this investment, it is actually going to quite quickly begin to pay for itself in terms of tax revenues. I think that at the moment the problem is our economy is very fragile. If you look at the government claims about the amount of people in, for example, employment, yes, they're right. Record levels of people being in employment. But record levels of people in poorly paid work without pensions, record levels of people that are in precarious work, catching a taxi here, you could be in an Uber. And a classic example of someone in precarious work with no
because the Labour mayor wants to take their licence away.
Well, that's a different debate.
Well, it is.
But my point is exactly this.
Nicola, just come back on this interest rate point. I mean, was my logic right there?
Yes, I think that's right. I think that there is a risk that if you go on a spending spree, then the people who actually buy the gilts that we issue, our government bonds, will be fearful that the economy is going to be running out of control again, and they will put the price of money up. And that actually has consequences for everybody who has a mortgage, because their mortgage rates will rise and everybody will then be poorer. So I think it's very important to try and balance our spending plans and understand fully where the money's coming from. So Labour talks about its grey book and says everything's fully costed, but they threw the WASPy women in there, and that's a massive cost. So that unbalances it again, and that's, I think, something that will concern the market.
Right, two quick comments from Nadhim and then
Just
Jake.
Very quickly, the largest lender to governments is PIMCO, and PIMCO has said that according to Labour's...
What is PIMCO?
PIMCO is one of the...
it's the largest manager of fixed income
lenders
portfolios
to global governments. Right? They've said what Labour's pledged to spend, 1.2 trillion, they would not lend to the United Kingdom. Now, John McDonnell wants to force pensioners and pension funds, therefore 8 million pensioners, to take government debt in return for the energy companies and other utilities, water and so on. So he's forcing them to take government debt.
Even BP,
even BT, absolutely. That means global markets will not lend to the UK. That means mortgage rates go up for people with mortgages. But more importantly, not just the mortgage, it's a double whammy. You then hit people, all 31 million workers, with about £2,400 of tax, because he has to find the money from somewhere. He'll look at taxation. This is why I say to you that the Labour plan will end up in a Venezuela-type situation. And there's nothing moral or decent.
I feel I'm going to have to let Sam back in on this in a moment, but first, Jake.
Yeah, I just add the point around the rhetoric being very important. So Sam sort of slightly dialed back at the language at the beginning of the election campaign. It was talking about getting rid of all billionaires and they're a bad thing. And I don't know if you heard the interview with John Caldwell this morning with John McDonnell. Those sorts of things are really important, and it's not just government borrowing, but this country is a very attractive place for wealthy people to come, and that supports the economy. The rhetoric is very important around this.
Final word on this from you, Sam.
Look, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that our plans are massively popular. The plans around bringing our assets, our country's assets, into public ownership. People are not stupid. They're fed up with rip off Britain. Look, when people are saying quite clearly that if Europe, most of the rest of the countries can run our rail system, at cost price without having to pass on huge profit costs through ticketing to
but
people
how
getting...
do you answer the point about PIMCO? And if people won't lend to us, where are you going to get the money from?
I think that people will lend to us.
Well, they said they won't.
Look, remember, a lot of the borrowing is also from the changes around taxation as well. I mean, look, the things we're proposing, the windfall tax on, for example, North Sea oil and gas. I mean, if it was under a Tory government, I would say, that in the 1980s, if we'd put that money into a sovereign wealth fund, as Norway did, we'd have an awful lot more money to spend. Instead, it was privatised. And over the last 20 years, they had net surplus profit in the North Sea oil and gas industry, £273 billion. So why shouldn't we ask for a little bit more of that money back so we can tackle the homelessness crisis, get more nurses into hospitals and get some police back on our streets?
We've spent a long time on the first question. The others, we'll do a little bit snappier. I'll move things along, but I thought really interesting answers there from all of you. Dares is particularly impressed by Nicola. He says, wow, I'm amazed, a Lib Dem who impresses me. I'm thinking there are hen's teeth to be found. Well, there you go. You can't get a higher compliment than that. David is in Enfield. David, what would you like to ask?
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, a lot of Tory politicians, especially the Chancellor, keep talking about our booming economy. But the real facts in the economy indicate anything but a booming economy. I mean, we've had no rise in real wages in the economy, average weekly earnings, since 2008. In fact, they're still below the 2008 level, according to the government's own statistics, which are published every month. We're going to be running a budget deficit of around 50 billion is the latest forecast for the current year. So George Osborne never achieved his goal of balancing the budget by 2015 that he promised in 2010. Our national debt in the last 10 years has doubled from 1 trillion to 1.8 trillion. Plus, we've got another 200 billion of PFI contracts outstanding. And we have the worst balance of payments deficit in the world. The Economist every week publishes a table of statistics of 42 leading countries. Our balance of payments current account performance is number 41 out of 42 as a percentage of gross domestic product. The only country worse than us is Colombia. And finally, our exchange rate's gone from 170 in 2012 to 130 currently. So how can we honestly say our economy is booming?
It's being so cheerful that keeps you going, isn't it, David? But I take your point. This balance of payments thing, when I was a teenager, balance of payments, that was the big economic news. We never hear about it now. So how can the economy be booming when we have that litany of disasters there? Jake Pugh.
Well, that's what happens if you have Labour and Tories in charge for a number of generations.
What were you before you became a Brexit Party member?
I've worked in the capital markets. I have a consulting company, and for the last 10 years I've spent my time helping firms understand the regulations that come out of Brussels.
So you weren't involved in party politics before this?
No, I stood for the referendum party in 1997, but that's my only direct involvement. So, yeah, I mean, as David's laid it out, there are radical changes needed. We fundamentally need a recalibration of the economy. I'm an MEP in Yorkshire. I spent a lot of time in the towns of Yorkshire. I was also in South Wales last week. And there is just a deep, deep frustration because large parts of our country have just been abandoned, really, by both parties for the last 40 years. If you think of many of the reforms, economic reforms that were made by Margaret Thatcher, that, the unfettered free markets do not produce good outcomes. So some of the things that we think we need to do and can only do by leaving the European Union properly, again to emphasise not from the 31st of January when we enter transition, is fundamentally change, start supporting national strategic industries as we've designated them. So I've done a lot of work with British Steel. Nobody would allow defence contracts to go externally. So there's time to designate national strategic industries. British Steel pays 60% more for its energy than they do in Germany, equivalent firms in Germany, 80% more than in France.
Why is that?
Because of the wholesale cost of energy. And other countries are more effective at supporting their industries. So what we need to do, there is no solution which is unfettered free markets and a binge of debt. We need to recalibrate our economies, investing in coastal communities. There's a whole range of things to do. And to be clear, it is not going to be done in one term.
I suspect, much to your possible horror, Nicola, you agree with every word of that.
No.
You don't?
Of course
I thought you would.
No, okay. Look, at the end of the day, we spent a lot of time already talking about debt. But really, we want an economy where we're getting lots of tax receipts. And you only get really good tax receipts if you've got growth. And that's why I desperately want to stop Brexit, because that has hindered growth. But actually, if you go back to 2008, we've had sluggish growth for quite a prolonged period. That's why I said maybe austerity went a little bit too far. And if you actually look at our recovery relative to other economies, major economies in the world, we recovered slower.
But our current growth rates are actually, compared to other EU economies, doing quite well.
Well, hardly. I mean,
we're better than Germany and France.
We narrowly avoided a recession, but our growth is not good. Trend growth in the UK is 2.5%
compared to other comparable EU
but that's not the point. The point is that trend growth in the UK is 2.5%, and we're miles off that. And if we actually stop Brexit now and just get back on track, we will have a major boom. We'll see growth, because there have been so many investment decisions that have been held up because of Brexit, because of the uncertainty.
But Nadhim will argue that if we get Brexit done, that money will flood into the economy. But that's
not getting Brexit done, and we all know that. We know that passing the withdrawal agreement, Iain, you're laughing, I know you agree with me on this. Yes, you know that's not getting Brexit done.
I would agree with you that far.
That's not the trade deal.
Yeah, but it is getting Brexit done in the sense that if we leave on the 31st, we will be out of the political and legal contracts.
Yeah, but that's a tiny part of the whole thing.
Well,
the trade deal
it's actually quite a big part. Nadhim.
Let me just attempt. So as the Business and Industry Minister, I was charged with, on the Friday before the Super Saturday, when we tried to get the deal through Parliament, that sort of final attempt by Boris, we got a deal. that it's an international treaty that was agreed to by 27 countries and the UK to get Brexit done. So my job was to call British businesses from all the sectors of the economy, because they had teams of people going through the deal, to get their feedback so I can take it to Westminster, to Parliament. And it wasn't a majority of businesses, it was unanimous. Every single business that I spoke to, from automotive to chemicals to the service sector, said it's a good deal, let's get it over the line, let's make sure it happens. Now, let me just come back on a couple of things, because David made a very important point, a very specific point around wages. Now, we want to see a high wage economy, which is why the Chancellor is targeting £10.50 an hour as a national living wage by 2024, because if we get Brexit done, we can have a high wage, high skills economy. We've promised £3 billion.
£10.50 is a high wage?
Well, if the national living wage is at £10.50, everything else begins to shift up. But you need the skills, which is why we are promising a skills fund of £3 billion. I used to be the apprenticeship czar, as David Cameron referred to me. You remember that, Iain? And which is why we're investing in those skills. Apprenticeship degrees, I think, are the most innovative piece of
we're slightly going off the question.
Let me come back to the question.
He says we have not got a booming economy. He listed all the reasons why. Is there a single one of those reasons that you disagree with?
No, it's been dynamic because actually it's created lots of jobs in the economy. We've taken people out of tax,
low paid.
Well, we've taken 12 people who paid £12,500 of tax. They pay zero tax on that.
We've got the worst levels of wage stagnation since the 1800s.
Wages are now growing faster than inflation.
People out
there,
you know
that.
Sure, they spark to life.
Hold on a second. Let me just finish this point.
Interesting.
Hang on a second. Just let me finish.
If we get Brexit done, there is a wall of money. There's a report last week saying that there's £150 billion of pent-up investment that would come into the UK once you take away the uncertainty. What Nicola's... Let me just answer.
That's not taking away the uncertainty.
Let me just answer you.
That's not taking it away.
Norman Lamb.
We could still
Norman Lamb could have been leader of your party. Norman Lamb could have been leader of your party. Vince Cable was leader of your party. They both said that Joe Swinson is wrong to go for revoke because it will tear the social fabric of this country.
That's a red
what does
herring.
What does that do to the economy?
We're not going to get 326.
Nicola, look at countries where the social fabric gets torn, the economy collapses.
Look, you know
so the two are linked.
That we are not going to get 326 seats. So therefore, revoke is an irrelevance.
So you lied to the country.
No, it's not lying. It's saying if you vote for us and give us 326 seats, well, it doesn't look as though that's very likely.
What was the point of raising it?
Why did you raise it?
Well, I don't know, because I wasn't involved then. But as far as I'm concerned, we're not going to get 326 seats.
Would you have recommended?
We have been promoting a second referendum since the day after the first referendum, and that's what we want. There have been 17 votes, Nadhim. But as you know, we've lost 17 times.
Would you have recommended revoke?
So, Iain, the stagnation... The stagnation...
Jake, I will come back to you in a moment, but before we come to Sam, I'm just going to go to a quick news bulletin. But to compensate Sam for this, I'm going to read out another text from Des, who is such a fan of yours. Des says, Sam, thank you for speaking with a Labour heart. Still think the ideas were a little unformed, but I hear your heart. So my challenge to Des is to say something nice about Nadhim and Jake before we go off air on this section of the programme at 9. It's 8:30. Let's get the news headlines on LBC from Lucinda Horsley.
2 British women are among 31 people in hospital after a volcanic island erupted in New Zealand. 5 people are now known to have died on White Island. New Zealand's Prime Minister says surveys of the area have shown no signs of life. Boris Johnson is promising the biggest ever Conservative investment into the NHS after he was shown a photo of a child appearing to sleep on a hospital floor. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn describes the boy's predicament as a disgrace, while Lib Dem leader Joe Swinson is accusing the Prime Minister of not caring. Blue's Story, which was temporarily pulled from some cinemas due to violence at screenings, has been nominated for a BAFTA Film Award. It's up for the Outstanding Debut Prize. LBC weather: a cloudy night with outbreaks of heavy rain and some strong winds. Showers in Northern Ireland, Wales and the west of England and Scotland by the early hours. A low of 1 degree.
Election 2019. Continuous coverage on LBC.
Are you one of the millions watching His Dark Materials on TV? Are you rooting for Lyra, terrified of Mrs. Coulter, or imagining what your own demon would be? His Dark Materials continues off the screen and on the page with Philip Pullman's new book, The Secret Commonwealth. Join Lyra for the next part of her epic journey. The Secret Commonwealth is out now in hardback, ebook, and audiobook.
Marooned in deep space and no sign of help?
Don't panic. And with the AA, the app lets you track the mechanic right to your side.
I'm thinking of joining the AA.
I don't think they accept cats as members.
Who said anything about being a member? I want one of those shiny yellow jackets. Ow!
There are lots of smart reasons to join the AA. You'll get unlimited call-outs, our tap and track app, and we'll get you going again in around 30 minutes of arrival. Switch to a different kind of breakdown service from just £5 a month. Visit theaa.com. New customers only. T's and C's apply.
Make their Christmas wishes come true. Whether they love Disney's Frozen 2, want to jet off on Barbie's Dream Plane, or ready up with the Fortnite Battle Royale collection. At littlewoods.com, you'll find all the toys they love, all with inclusive delivery and free returns. Own Christmas. Shop now at littlewoods.com.
You never know where life will take you, which is why the new BMW 3 Series Touring is perfect if you're all packed up for, or escaping to. It has extensive storage and an automatic tailgate, handy if your hands are full. And it even has an optional intelligent voice assistant to help you at every turn. The new BMW 3 Series Touring. Book your 24-hour test drive today. Test drive subject to status and availability. Participating retailers only.
There's nothing like meeting face-to-face. And there's nothing like Zoom to make that happen. Zoom lets you connect and do business across town or around the world. Zoom ties together all of your communication needs into one easy platform for video conferencing, phone calls, group chat, webinars, and your conference rooms. Connect easily from anywhere. Your mobile phone, your laptop, or conference room. Zoom is how business gets done. Get your free account at zoom.com today. Meet happy with Zoom.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
It's 8:34 here on LBC. We are talking about business and the economy because that's the subject of our election debate here. We are here with Nicola Horlick, who's Liberal Democrat candidate and British Investment Fund manager. Jake Pugh is a businessman and Brexit Party MEP. Sam Tarry, president of the Class think tank, trade unionist and Labour candidate, and Nadhim Zahawi, business minister and Conservative candidate. Des has been back in touch. He says, Jake, thank you for Brexit. You listened. So that's nice. We just have a comment for Nadhim waiting, I'm sure, Des, don't you? He says, hopefully.
Come on, Des.
Now, Sam Tarry, now the question that we had has disappeared off my screen here, and I can't actually remember what it was. I hope you can.
It was all the really negative economic indicators.
Yes,
how can we have a booming economy if it's
actually
with
to
all
say
that
something in
stagnation?
favour of what Jake was saying, because there are a number of things in what he said which I would actually agree with about the sorts of communities he's talking about.
I feel my work here is done now.
About the sorts of communities he's talking about who have felt held back and left behind for an awful long time. I mean, Brexit didn't just happen, and the vote for Brexit in working class communities did not just happen out of thin air. It came out of anger, it came out of neglect, it came out of 30 years of what some people would call neoliberalism, I would call Thatcherism. And so what's interesting is, though we may debate about the sort of solutions, my view is whether we have Brexit or don't have Brexit, the scale of investment needed into our economy to get these people and these communities back on their feet is absolutely huge. And it's interesting, the things we actually talk about in Labour's manifesto, whether it's building the gigafactories to actually build more electric cars, whether it's the kind of use of more technology around wind farms, these are exactly the sort of policies that are targeted at the types of people that our friend from the Brexit Party is talking about. I think Labour is actually the only party putting forward serious policies that are going to get these communities back their dignity and their pride to put back in place those jobs
problem
that they
is,
don't have
and
anymore.
I'm sure you've heard this on the doorstep where you are, but I hear countless tales from both Labour and Tory canvassers who tell me that the reaction from a lot of die-hard Labour voters on the doorstep is get Brexit done. So that soundbite, I mean, it's very annoying. It's the new strong and stable soundbite of this election, but it seems to have permeated through to the very voters that Boris Johnson needs to get a majority. Have you been hearing this?
I mean, look, I'm standing in East London, so I've not really heard it that much, if truth be told. I mean, look, I'm going to be campaigning in Dagenham, which is quite nearby, but a different kettle of fish. As Billy Bragg once said, it's a little bit of the north dropped into East London. I'll find out tomorrow when I'm there. But what I have been hearing is that people are hurting. People want their schools to be sorted out. They want the money to go back into them. They want the police and the bobbies back on the streets. They want the nurses actually not to have to go to food banks. They want doctors not to be quitting medicine because of stress. These are the problems that are facing people. And they will not be solved whether we have Brexit or don't have Brexit. They're going to be solved by actually investing into our people of this country and our economy on a huge scale. Okay. And if we're going to even try and even begin to meet the climate crisis, we've got to go down that route as well.
Nadhim, very quickly.
I had a lady in Studley open the door to me and say that she works for the NHS, she's voting Conservative, because on the biggest issue that the country faces, Brexit, she doesn't believe that the Labour leader is telling the truth. That is the problem Sam has around the country, is Labour are all over the place in terms of their position on Brexit. You don't know where Jeremy Corbyn actually stands on Brexit. What we do know is he'll have 2 referendums. And the one thing you know, whether you vote to remain or leave, Nicola wants to stop Brexit, she's clear on that, but you know that a referendum will be acrimonious and poisonous and will just compound the dither and the delay and the uncertainty for business, not just large businesses, SME, small and medium-sized businesses in all over the country. Okay. Are crying out for that certainty, which is why we've got to deliver Brexit.
Let's move on to another question from Amanda in Hereford. Amanda, what would you like to ask?
Hello, I hope this isn't a non sequitur. I haven't heard the programme from the beginning, but it's a quick comment and a question about austerity. I think a lot of us who haven't been wearing, goggles to take us back to the 70s, whatever we happen to be discussing, realised long ago that austerity is a euphemism for stealing from society to benefit those up in the sunny canopy, and there's always money for war or for subsidising fire sales of public assets or for HS2, how many billions have been ploughed into that, or for bribing coy coalition
I need to move you to a question, Amanda.
Sudden, when it comes to if the money wasn't being misappropriated, then there'd be money for decent services too, as we see on the continent.
Okay, I need a question.
That if this brand of social democracy that Jeremy Corbyn has been advocating, which is mainstream in Europe, works well in Scandinavia, in Denmark, in the Netherlands, where they presumably have some politicians with some integrity, why shouldn't it work here?
Sam Tarry, open goal, kick the ball.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it seems absolutely absurd to me that we have the national state-run companies from Holland, from France, from Germany running most of our rail system. You speak to any commuter, they'll be desperate to go out and vote for Labour with our promise of taking money from vehicle excise duty, so going very strongly on the environmental side, 1.5 billion, to directly cut rail fares. Because if we're going to get people out of planes and out of their cars and onto the transport system, that is a very common sense policy that is the norm in most of Europe. And this is the point. Most of the stuff in Labour's manifesto is not only fully costed, we're actually taking tried and tested examples from around the world and saying if it's good enough for them, it's got to be good enough for us as well. And I think the key thing I thought was very interesting in what that lady said is there are an awful lot of people in this country that over the last 10 years have got eye-wateringly wealthy, whereas at the bottom end, people have had to fight amongst themselves for just the scraps that have been left, whether it's local authorities seeing their budgets cut by 60%, whether it's mental health services that are barely in existence. These are the sorts of things that are creating a real crisis in society. And I find it so strange when Conservative politicians come onto the radio, onto television, to tell us everything's so great, it's so wonderful. It's just not. It's just not wonderful for the vast majority of people in this country. And so I think that's why, actually, having had put forward this fully costed manifesto, I think the talk is going to be in for a real surprise when it comes to Thursday evening.
Nadhim Zahawi, Scandinavian spending levels about 44% of GDP. That's all that Labour are suggesting here. That's not extreme, is it?
Well, I think that Amanda's question talked about the 70s. So in the 70s, when income tax was 70 or 80%, the top 1% that effectively contributed about 11% of income tax. Today, the top 1% contribute 29% of income tax. So I think the best way to be a steward of the economy is not to obsess about rates, because actually when we've dropped the corporation tax rate from 28% down to 19%, more money came to the exchequer. Yes, there were other contributing factors, but actually more money. And Arthur Laffer famously, the economist, said that
why did you cancel your corporation tax reduction then?
I'm going to tell you. Which is why I mentioned Arthur Laffer. That's why I said that, because actually you reach a point at which reducing it any further may not be the right thing to do, because actually you want to invest in the NHS.
Have we reached
34 billion. Yes, which is why we froze. We have frozen it at 19%, rightly so, in our manifesto. If we have a working majority,
12%.
I hear you, but if we have a working majority, we're freezing it at 90%, so that the £6 billion that we think will be additional income coming in, we can spend on public services.
So
but the point I'm making here,
I'm going to press you on this, because
don't obsess about rates. Obsess about tax take, what comes into the exchequer, because that's what you spend on more police officers, 20,000 more.
But it was your government that was obsessing about rates, taking it down to 17% on the argument that actually it would raise more money, and now you're completely resigning from that.
No. We said was we would bring it down 28% down to 19, which we've done. It was going to head to 17. Boris, a new prime minister, been in office in 130 days, 140 days, doesn't want to go any further. He wants to take that money that it will generate to invest in NHS, £34 billion cash boost, the biggest cash boost, 20 billion in real terms before you say that to me, 20,000 more police officers.
Okay. But I don't think anybody's
14
convinced by
billion
that
into
argument
schools.
about the reduction in rates. But it goes back to the point that Jeremy Corbyn wants to put corporation tax back up to 26%. Again, not a high rate compared to a lot of European countries. You can't portray that as an extreme measure. It's entirely in keeping with other European countries.
Yes, and when they analyse his numbers, if you take that, plus he wants to take about 10% of companies' shareholding from them, which is another 33% of corporation tax, you're talking about over 50%.
No, but by your own argument, if the corporation tax rate is put up from 19 to 26%, that will raise a huge amount more money.
Not necessarily. That's
the
my point.
10% shares are going to the workers of those companies.
My point. What Jeremy Corbyn is doing is economically illiterate, because those companies will, as we saw when we dropped it from 28 to 19, they spent less money trying to avoid it. And actually just paid the taxes.
That's an argument for lowering it. Jake Pugh, what's your view on... Let's go back to this sort of brand of social democracy. Is what Jeremy Corbyn's offering, in your view, a brand of social democracy that we see in Scandinavian countries, or something rather different?
Well, both Labour and Conservative are presenting rather binary outcomes, because the current addiction is that macroeconomics can solve everything. We can borrow unlimited amounts of money, or we can set tax rates. We're not talking about the whole supply side piece, which is around competitiveness, deregulation to an extent. And before anybody goes cutting, social provision, all the rest of it, there was a study done that said that if you cut red tape by 10%, you get a 1% growth in GDP. That was an Open Europe report. So everybody's obsessing around governments have the answer. We'll raise money, borrow it, we'll spend it, we'll reduce tax rates. But actually what you want to do is to create competitiveness in the economy. And small companies, individuals, are the people who then deliver the growth. So we just talked about corporation tax. There are 1.5 million companies in total that pay corporation tax. 1 million of those pay £10,000 or less. So if you exempted, and they pay, so there's 2/3 of all companies pay 6% of corporation tax. So we said if you were exempted, if you had profit before tax of £50,000, you'd pay no corporation tax. All that cost of audit, compliance, HMRC collection costs, that's just 3.4 billion, 6% of the corporation tax, the most productive part of the economy. Give that to small businesses, they'll deliver the business growth.
Nicola.
So, I want a fairer society, I want better services, but the model of Scandinavia you can't really apply to the UK. These are very small countries. They collectively, the people who live within them, are happy to pay very high rates of tax in order to have those public services. Our economy is totally different. You can't apply that model. So I don't think it's affordable to do what the Labour Party wants to do. I've explained earlier in this whole debate about how you have to persuade people to fund it. You have to get international investors to buy your bonds, your government debt, if you want to do that. And I think it would be difficult. But I also think that the Tory plans are ridiculous and outrageous as well, because they're planning to spend vast sums of money and at the same time have Brexit, and it could end up being a very hard Brexit, because we could crash out without a deal in this time next year, and that will cost this country at least 50 to 70 billion, possibly more. So I don't really see how you can bear that cost of crashing out of Europe and at the same time spend all the money, have the 20,000 nurses and the 20,000 police officers, well, it's 50,000 nurses and 20,000 police officers, and so on and so forth. So that's why I want to stop Brexit, because that in effect creates a Brexit dividend in two ways. First of all, you save that 50 to 70 billion, but secondly, we would have a boom. I can tell you, having been an investment manager for 36 years and observed lots of different cycles and all sorts of strange events happening, I can tell you that if we stopped Brexit, there would be an economic boom, and that would result in higher tax revenues, and that would allow us to spend more on our public services.
Someone here is asking you why, when they live in SW4, they're getting your promotional leaflets. I don't know whether we want to go into that, but there we are. Right, we are going to take more of your calls. Amanda, thank you very much for that. We're going to take more of your questions in just a moment. You're listening to LBC. It's 8:48.
LBC's Election Call with Eddie Mair. Getting answers to the questions you want asking.
Nadhim Zahawi from the Conservatives.
I was part of the homelessness task force that Theresa May set up. We've put £1.2 billion in until April next year, and then an additional £422 million for 2021.
It's again just a lot of noise that goes around the edges, but rather than addressing the issue that street homelessness has gone up by 165% under your watch, with very little being said about what's going to be done about it.
LBC's Election Call, every Monday to Thursday, leading Britain's conversation with Eddie Mair. LBC.
For specialist advice on smart technology to help cut heating bills, visit swellheating.com. Rely on us to keep you warm.
Psst. We've got something to tell you about the Honda Jazz. We know it looks small, but inside, it's really big. That's why we've created the small but big Jazz event, where you can get 0% APR representative and 5 years complimentary servicing on all grades until the 31st of January. The Honda Jazz, the small car with the big offer. Visit your local dealer to find out more. Honda dealers are credit brokers, not lenders. Finance provided by Honda Finance Europe, authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Terms and conditions apply.
Marooned in deep space and no sign of help? Don't panic. And with the AA, the app lets you track the mechanic right to your side.
I'm thinking of joining the AA. I don't think they accept cats as members. Who said anything about being a member? I want one of those shiny yellow jackets. Ow!
There are lots of smart reasons to join the AA. You'll get unlimited call-outs, our tap and track app, and we'll get you going again in around 30 minutes of arrival. Switch to a different kind of breakdown service from just £5 a month. Visit theaa.com. New customers only. T's and C's apply.
At Lidl, we're big on the sweetest Christmas and those happily ever afters, like our winter warmer deluxe mince pie strudel at just $2.99 and our deluxe espresso martini roulade for only $4.99. Big on a Christmas you can believe in. Now that's big on quality and always Lidl on price. Subject to availability, selected stores excludes NI.
So, what am I taking on this mission?
This gadget is a paperclip that's also a transmitter.
Wow.
Look, toothpaste that burns through glass.
Whoop-de-doo. What about these little things?
Invisible hearing aids. They fit completely in the ear.
Brilliant. How do I put them in?
You don't. They're for my ears only. Invisible hearing aids at transparent prices. From £495 at Specsavers. Ask in store for details.
Close your eyes. You're enjoying a Mediterranean lunch with sea views. Feel the vibes. Open your eyes. That's Castillon. Close your eyes again. You're on the beach with your friends. The sea caressing your feet. Feel the freedom. Open your eyes. That's Castillon. Pack your bags and let's go. Now with direct flights from London Stansted and Luton to Castillon Airport, you've no excuse. Seize the moment. Memories to live for. Castillon, Spain. Turismo de Castillon.com.
Make their Christmas wishes come true. Whether they love Disney's Frozen 2, want to jet off on Barbie's dream plane, or ready up with the Fortnite Battle Royale collection. At littlewoods.com, you'll find all the toys they love, all with inclusive delivery and free returns. Own Christmas. Shop now at littlewoods.com.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 8:51. I'm going to get in two questions in the next 9 minutes. I'm going to ask the panellists to be a little bit briefer maybe in their answers. I'm not complaining, just so we can get as much in as possible. Nadhim Zahawi, Nicola, Horlick, Jake Pugh and Sam Tarry here with us. Chris is a new caller in Putney. Chris, you have a really interesting question. What is it?
Yeah, hi, Ian. So if you look at kind of the 30-odd Labour shadow cabinet, I don't think a single one of them has ever kind of set up their own business, generated, private sector wealth, employed people. Other than the law profession, very few have actually ever worked in business, I think, other than Barry Gardner, from what I could see. If you look at the other parties as well, Joe Swinton's a career politician. Boris Johnson hasn't really done much else outside of the political world. So I think the facts are undisputable. But, I mean, my question to the panel would be, do they think that matters?
So should politicians, or should there be more politicians with business experience? Nicola Horlick, I imagine that's a very resounding yes from you.
Yes, and I think what's happened over the last few years is that you've got all these people who have gone to university, done politics and economics, then become researchers, then become a councillor, then become an MP. And they've lived in this very narrow world and haven't had any experience outside of that. Now, all the people around this table actually have had outside experience, and I think that adds hugely to the political debate if you have people who have had outside experience, have employed people, have actually had to sack people, have experienced downturns and really felt the pain. And I think it's very important that we try to encourage more business people to come into Parliament.
Jake Pugh, it's a salutary lesson, isn't it? If you run a business, and I've only ever run small businesses, but when you get to the end of the month and you wonder how you're going to be able to afford to pay people because of cash flow issues, it's an awful experience in a way, but it teaches you an awful lot, doesn't it?
Cash flow is exactly what I was going to say. Actually, that's as you say, when you've got bills to pay, you've got fixed costs. You might have clients in my business who pay you 60 days or something, but you've still got to pay your staff and your fixed costs as you go along. I don't think you're getting any disagreement from us that having that breadth, diversity, if you want, of experience actually, but not just business, but you want the broadest range of people with the broadest range of life experiences. I think the only thing I'd say that I sometimes look at some of the big, running a massive government department must be a huge challenge, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but I can't imagine how do you run the health service. Well, clearly, probably you don't. But I mean, it's some of these. I don't know if there's a better way to look at that, and I'm not going to make the political point of getting us in, but there's so much. All the things we talked about, really, if you took the politics out of it, we're all saying there's some radical issues in this country we face.
Nadhim Zahawi, you were a founder of YouGov. You started that business. I was a very minor shareholder in it at the beginning. Sold my shares far too early, it has to be said. What did you learn from that experience that you can translate into your political life?
So, until you lose money, I think you have no idea, how hard it is to start a business, run a business, and how difficult the economy can be, which is why it's so precious and we need to be very careful when we make decisions about it. My lesson wasn't so much from YouGov, because YouGov was the great success. It was the failure. So I've had a failed business before that, and I think to Jake's point, you can't just look at the sort of the turnover, because the turnover of a company can be very deceiving. You've got to look at then what the cost base is and what your bottom line is, because if you could be turning over a lot of money, but if you're losing money on every product you're selling, then you're not in a good place. So I think that's important. The one thing I do want to give a shout out to is more engineers. I'm a chemical engineer from University College London, which I'm very proud of. The one thing engineers are good at is analysing a lot of data and focusing on what's material. What do we need to decide? Jake's point about, how do you run a big department? You really need to be able to analyse a lot of data points, dismiss the stuff that can wait, and just focus on the things that are essential.
Right, we're slightly running out of time.
But the last bit is actually, you do need diversity. There's some very, very clever people in Parliament who may have not necessarily worked in business, but I would just say you need all types of people, real diversity, to create a healthy Parliament.
Sam, Chris was directing a question at you in a sense here, saying not enough business experience on the Labour benches. You're a trade union official. How important is that in the life of an MP?
Really, really important, I think, because look, I mean, trade unions often we're in the news for us when we're kind of locked in, sort of strife with employers. But what's not talked about is much of the time when we're working with employers, because actually the success of a business of which our members are a part of is obviously good for the business and good for the people that we are representing in terms of wages, terms and conditions, and so on. That's really, really important.
Absolutely.
I think so. For example,
interrupt you there. You're absolutely right. I saw it firsthand with British Steel, because we're going through the rescue with the unions who've been absolutely brilliant, first-class leaders in those unions. So I just wanted to speak.
Yeah, no, sure. And I think the other thing, though, is actually about having people from different backgrounds, particularly something we don't talk about this much anymore, which is class background. Parliament is packed full of people who went to private schools, people who went to the top universities. Look, I admit, like Nadhim, I went to UCL, but I stacked shelves in Sainsbury's to allow myself to be able to go and have that degree education. I think that's one of the things, actually, in Labour has got better at this election. You'll see a far greater diversity in terms of class and racial background of the candidates standing in this election. I think that's a good step forward. On the sense in terms of business, we've doubled down actually on what we're offering small to medium enterprises. Our friend from the Brexit Party mentioned about late payments, essentially. That's a really core part of our business manifesto for small to medium enterprises, so that late payments, we're going to actually give far more stringent powers to stop that happening, to help small to medium enterprises.
Ian, could I just add one point as well? The difference between the private sector and politics, which I've discovered, is that accountability to your clients. Having a 5-year fixed contract, you can ignore 52% vote of your shareholders, act with impunity. There's a lot less accountability, and that, I think, was the reason for a lot of frustration amongst the UK voters.
Can't be more accountable than an elected trade union official.
I've just got a Skype message from a friend of mine who is owed money by a Conservative MP for late payment for building a website. So he's totally with you on late payment there. He's going to
pay your bill, whoever you are.
I'll tell you who it is in a moment, but maybe not on air, because I don't want to libel anyone. Listen, I think that was a really, really interesting hour. I hope everybody who's listening has enjoyed it. I think exactly the right tone of debate. I think we've all learnt an awful lot. So thank you to Sam Tarry, Jake Pugh, Nicola Horlick and Nadhim Zahawi. Coming up in the next hour on LBC, I want to ask you this. It's actually, I'm going to admit, and this is not me being lazy, but yesterday on the Sunday show, we asked people in the 10 o'clock hour, are you voting on policy or personality? Remember Tony Benn said it's all about policy, it's not personality. That's my impression of Tony Benn, much better than John Bercows, possibly not. And I think that a lot of undecided voters will vote probably more on personality than policy when they come to make a decision. Are you one of them? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. No guess, just your calls over the course of the next 60 minutes. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, 2 British women are in hospital after being injured in a volcanic eruption in New Zealand. It's been confirmed they're among more than 30 people who were hurt on White Island. At least 5 others are dead. There are questions as to why tourists were allowed there after scientists recently noticed